The Ukrainian army has just pulled off perhaps its greatest feat yet, fending off one of the biggest Russian assaults since the war began. The Ukrainians have beat the odds again and again over the last few years, but this latest triumph is on another level. It demonstrates the fortitude and willpower of the Ukrainian military and raises questions about Russia's real chances of winning this war. The attack took place on Thursday, April 17. That was the day that Russia decided to go all out in its attempt to capture a key piece of land in the Pokrovsk area, which has been a major target for Russia for quite some time. Pokrovsk sits in the western Donetsk Oblast of Ukraine. It's been a site of great interest during the Russian invasion of Ukraine so far, with Russian forces repeatedly launching attacks in this region. They've gained some ground over time and captured an array of local towns and settlements, but their main target, Pokrovsk itself, still eludes them. The Ukrainians have managed to dig in and hold on to this city. It's important that they continue to do so, because Pokrovsk holds significant strategic importance. It's a key logistical and transportation hub in the Donetsk Oblast, with strong road and railway links across the country. The Ukrainians have used those links to their advantage, keeping the troops supplied. If the Russians were to take this city, it would represent a major victory. It could cripple the Ukrainian army and strengthen the Russian side from a tactical standpoint, giving them the opportunity to threaten more areas around the region and expand their foothold much further into the country. The big assault of April 17 was the latest in a long series of battles in the region. But this one was bigger than the rest, with Russia sending in a huge number of troops and vehicles. Their goal was clear. They hoped to overwhelm the Ukrainian defenders and take Pokrovsk once and for all. Perhaps the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, even hoped to announce a big victory as part of his country's Easter celebrations. Unfortunately for him, things didn't turn out that way, thanks to the 14th Chernovo-Kalina Brigade of Ukraine's National Guard, who were stationed in the area ready to fend off the invaders. The Russian assault wasn't just a big one, it was strongly armoured. Alexander Pimnenko, commander of the National Guard of Ukraine, shared updates and videos documenting the assault on the social media platform Telegram. Pimnenko wrote, "Today, the guardsmen of the 14th Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine, Chernovo-Kalina, powerfully repelled a large-scale mechanized assault by the Russian occupiers in the Pokrovsk direction. The enemy threw a large amount of equipment into the battle. This time, most of it was armored combat vehicles and motorcycles, as well as about 2 companies of manpower. That's a formidable force." Mykola Koval, head of communications for the 14th Brigade, called it one of the biggest offensives seen in the region of late. Junior Sergeant Stanislav Bunyatov of the 24th Aidar Assault Battalion echoed those claims, calling the Russian offensive a fierce move on Telegram. We can't know exactly how the Russian side hoped the assault would turn out, but it's clear from the amount of men, vehicles and equipment they committed to this attack that they hoped to at least do some damage and take some territory. But they weren't counting on the rapid, efficient and deadly response of the 14th Brigade fighters. The Ukrainian forces have gotten used to defending this patch of their land. They know that Russian assaults can come at any time, and they have to be ready for anything, even a large-scale mechanized attack like this. Fortunately, they were absolutely ready. Commander Pivnenko shared 2 videos on Telegram showing how the assault happened and detailing the results. Pivnenko wrote, "Our defenders showed true professionalism and resilience. The results of the battle are impressive." He went to estimate the Russian losses, suggesting that around 200 Russian soldiers had been killed, dozens more were wounded, and over 100 pieces of enemy equipment were destroyed, including close to 100 motorcycles, over 20 armoured vehicles, and some artillery systems. Pivnenko summed up his thoughts on the event, stating, "The battle is another proof of the coordinated and professional actions of our defenders who hold the front. The fighters of Chervono-Kalina act clearly and ruthlessly towards the enemy, defending every piece of their native land. Thank you to our heroes for their steadfastness and courage." He followed that up with a second Telegram post, complete with the caption, "A few more shots of the repelling of the enemy's biker assault in the Pokrovsk direction. It's obvious that after clarification, the number of enemy losses will be greater. Thank you for the courageous and decisive actions of the fighters of the NGU Chervono-Kalina Brigade, as well as the 1st Kodak and 4th Pavlorad Regiment of the National Guard. Glory to Ukraine." The videos Pivnenko shared featured mostly drone footage, showing a number of destroyed Russian vehicles, Russian troops fleeing or falling to the ground, and one of them even appearing to wave a white flag on the end of his rifle towards the end of the second clip. The videos also show heavy explosions and thick smoke, while also demonstrating the huge number of vehicles that Russia committed to this assault. Long lines of armoured vehicles and bikes travelled down the road, which highlights what a big victory this was for Ukraine. Indeed, in many ways, it was a truly unbelievable accomplishment. It's no secret that Russia has a much larger force than Ukraine, with over 1.3 million active soldiers and 2 million reservists for Russia, compared to around 900,000 active duty personnel for Ukraine and around 1.2 million reserve forces. Russia has much more firepower on the whole too. It has over 130,000 armoured vehicles, while Ukraine has less than 20,000. Russia boasts around 5,750 tanks too, while Ukraine has little over 1,100. In terms of artillery, rocket launchers and other key areas, Russia continues to hold huge advantages. Because of this, the prevailing narrative around the war has largely centered around the idea of Russia overwhelming Ukraine through sheer force of numbers. If Russia throws enough soldiers, tanks and firepower at Ukraine, it should in theory eventually get what it wants, wearing the Ukrainians down over time. However, this battle paints a very different picture. In fact, it's almost a microcosm of the entire invasion so far. Russia launched a huge attack, hoping that the pressure of all those men, vehicles and weapons would win out in the end. But the Ukrainian defenders of the 14th Brigade, despite not having access to the same amount of equipment as the invading forces, managed to not only fight them off, but inflicted serious losses for the enemy, killing numerous Russian soldiers and putting dozens of vehicles completely out of action. And this latest Ukrainian success story isn't an outlier or exception. It's just another in a recent series of victories that should help to inspire and motivate Ukrainian military members all across the nation. In fact, only a day before the April 17 assault, Russia launched another huge offensive in southern Ukraine. Details of that attack were also shared on Telegram, this time via the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine account. The Defense Forces post stated that the attack began at around 6 p.m. on April 16 at the frontline section near the settlements of Pyathykati, Stepov, Lobkov, Mala Tokmachka and Mali Shabaki. Reports stated that the Russian offensive was once again a vast and intimidating one. It was said to be made up of approximately 320 soldiers, backed up by 40 armoured combat vehicles, around a dozen buggies and 3 tanks too. The troops were believed to come from the 58th Combined Arms Army of the Southern Military District. The subsequent battle between the Russian attackers and Ukrainian defenders lasted a little over 2.5 hours, but the Ukrainians came out on top. A large part of this was because of their preparedness. The Ukrainian forces had drones in the air above the region, keeping a close eye out for any invading forces. They spotted the advancing Russians quite early on, when they were still some distance away. This gave the Ukrainian side a clear advantage, as they had time to launch their own counter-attack before the Russians got anywhere near them. They quickly launched both drone and artillery unit attacks, managing to take down the first few Russian armoured vehicles around 5 miles before the actual line of combat. Further strikes continued from the Ukrainians, taking out one vehicle after another of the invading force. Thanks to that, by the end of the battle, according to the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine account, around 140 Russian soldiers were killed, all 3 of their tanks were damaged, and close to 30 other pieces of military equipment were destroyed. To top it all off, the Ukrainians didn't lose any of their positions or territory. In other words, the Russian assault was a total failure, just like the one that followed on April 17. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has spoken about both of these encounters in his regular video briefings, highlighting the courage and resilience of his countrymen and their incredible willingness to defend every inch of their land, even in the face of challenging and sometimes almost overwhelming odds. Earlier on in April, yet another big Russian offensive was countered well by Ukraine. That one took place on April 3rd, near the village of Andrivka in the Donetsk region. There, according to reports from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and the tactical group Vuhledar on social media, Russian forces launched a major attack with the intention of breaking through Ukrainian defensive lines. This is an area of intense fighting, with as many as 30 Russian attacks a day, but many of them are very small. This one, like the others spoken about earlier, was much different in size and scale. According to the report, the Russians sent in 2 platoons of troops as well as 19 armoured vehicles. Yet again, the Ukrainians were prepared. They had aerial reconnaissance units up in the air, scanning for any signs of the enemy. Thanks to that, they were able to spot the column of enemy forces on the outskirts of the village, quickly launching artillery strikes to rain down fire on the Russians. Not long after that, the Russians stopped their advance, with soldiers turning and fleeing to a nearby field in order to survive. But the Ukrainians didn't just let them run away or hide, they pushed their advantage further. The defenders used drones, artillery and airdrop munitions to deal more damage to the enemy, wiping out multiple pieces of Russian equipment and killing dozens of soldiers too. Thanks to all of these recent successes on the Ukrainian side, the country has been able to celebrate some important achievements. On April 17, for instance, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, announced that around 6 square miles of land near Pokrovsk had been liberated in recent weeks. Syrsky announced this accomplishment after spending some time in the area, meeting with various brigades responsible for fending off some of the fiercest Russian assaults. He stated, "Over the course of 3 days, I visited almost all brigades of this most powerful grouping of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, which bears the brunt of the enemy's spring offensive and destroys its best forces and means." He stated that around 30 Russian attacks a day are being fended off in the Pokrovsk area, with significant losses on the Russian side. But the questions have to be asked. How long can all of this continue? And what could happen next if the Russian attacks ramp up even further? In the wake of the April 17 assault, Stanislav Bunyatov of the 24th Aidar Assault Battalion wrote online that Russian attacks like this one, making use of 2-wheeled disposable stormtroopers, pose unique challenges for the Ukrainian defenders. The focus of attention gets scattered, the risk of breaking through rises, artillery becomes less effective, and the FPV drones without optics face limitations. Clearly, while the actions of the 14th Brigade on April 17 were impressive and successful, it was just one battle in an ongoing war. It won't be the last time that Russia commits forces to Pokrovsk, and if it continues to keep on throwing troops and tanks and armoured vehicles at Pokrovsk and other key areas along the eastern front of Ukraine, they could eventually prove successful. Of course, the future can't be predicted, but much can be learned from these events, with both encouraging and troubling conclusions to draw. On the positive side, the April 17 assault was yet another example of Ukrainian strength and resistance. In the face of so many enemy forces, the brigade could have crumbled, its fighters could have been wiped out, forced to retreat, or simply been overwhelmed. Instead, the brigade managed to stand firm, and this shows how well the Ukrainian military forces have managed to adapt to the challenges of the invasion. They continue to use their knowledge of their own land, combined with strategic surveillance and the vital equipment provided to them by allies like the US and Europe, to maintain their grip on important locations like Pokrovsk. At the moment, there's no sign of this changing anytime soon. In April alone, as detailed earlier, Ukraine has had several huge success stories to boast about, fending off no less than 3 huge Russian assault attempts, plus the dozens of other smaller attacks that occur every single day across Donetsk and elsewhere. The Ukrainians have dug in well. They have proven that large forces will not intimidate them, and as long as they hold important territory, they have a big advantage. This single battle even raises questions about Russia's odds of long-term victory. Even though it has a massive force, it doesn't have limitless soldiers and vehicles to throw away like this. If it keeps on launching one failed attack after another, it will end up losing and wasting a vast amount of lives and important pieces of equipment. And that will take a broader toll on its military. Morale could drop even further than it already is, for example, with soldiers less inclined to fully commit themselves to the orders they receive. That could lead to yet more failed offensives, with the opposite effect on the Ukrainian side. Their morale will continue to rise in the wake of victories like this one, and they can take plenty of heart from each assault they fend off, learning more about the enemy each time and discovering new and better ways to combat them. If Russia wants these kinds of assaults to succeed, it will inevitably have to accept the loss of many men, vehicles, and valuable pieces of military equipment. It may also have to change its strategy or accept even more losses before it gets the ground it wants, if it ever manages to do so. But that's where the worrying side of this situation emerges. With these large-scale assaults, Russia has proven it has no qualms about sending many men and vehicles to their doom in its quest to gain as much ground as it can. Its strategy is clearly focused on exerting colossal amounts of pressure on its opposition, hoping that eventually Ukraine's defenders will simply buckle and break under all that weight. While it hasn't worked yet in Pokrovsk, this tactic has worked in other areas. Military maps tracking the ongoing conflict show that Russia is grinding away at Ukraine, claiming 1 square mile of land after another. According to some estimates, since the invasion began, Russia has taken control of more than 27,000 square miles of Ukraine, which is about 12% of the entire country. Even in the highly contested Pokrovsk region, Russia has managed to make inroads, with the country's forces present around the city limit. Estimates suggest that Russia has lost between 150,000 to more than 200,000 soldiers since the invasion began, though the number could be even higher. That's a staggering amount, but the Russians still have huge numbers of soldiers to call on. They could, therefore, level up their next offensive even more, sending in not 1 or 2 companies of men, but several more, backed up with vehicles, tanks, or even air support. If Russia was able to eventually take Pokrovsk through these means, the fear on the Ukrainian side is that the Russian forces could then proceed down the Pokrovsk-Kostyantynivka highway, heading towards the Dnipropetrovsk region and taking over more territory at a much faster pace. They could eventually target the city of Dnipro, the 4th largest of Ukraine, home to almost 1 million people. Various military experts have weighed in on this possibility, with varying opinions, but many agree that Pokrovsk, along with a few other small towns and villages, is of huge strategic importance to Russia's future plans and possible progression. If they are eventually able to claim it as their own, it would be a huge blow to Ukraine. But if Ukraine can keep on defending this particular part of its land, it can limit Russia's progress enormously and even force the enemy to adopt different tactics or targets in its plans to take over Donetsk and other regions. For now, Ukraine can breathe a sigh of relief. Pokrovsk is still theirs, and the incredible work of the 14th Brigade should serve as an inspiring example to the rest of the Ukrainian military, showing that through grit, determination and smart tactics, it's possible to defend their turf against even the biggest of Russian assaults. But what do you think about Ukraine's ability to hold off these massive Russian offensives? Can the country continue to withstand wave after wave of attacks in Pokrovsk and beyond? Or will Russia eventually overwhelm the defenders with sheer force? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show for more independent coverage of the war in Ukraine and other conflicts around the world. We appreciate your support.